The water was perfect. Blue and still, the surface so clean you could see the drain cover at the bottom. General Michael Hargrove, though he'd insisted on being called Mike for the last 25 years, stood at the edge of his pool at 6:47 a.m., same as every morning, running the net around the perimeter in practiced economical strokes. No debris, no leaves, no algae, just clean water the way a thing ought to be maintained. He'd built this pool himself in 1998, dug the hole, poured the concrete, installed every filter and jet by his own hands. It was the only monument to his retirement that mattered, not the gold watch from the Army, not the shadow box with his medals, not even the 3 commendation letters from the Pentagon. This pool meant something. It meant he still knew how to keep things in order. That control mattered. That discipline mattered. That the world didn't have to fall apart just because a man got old. At 73, Mike was lean and weathered, his skin the color of an old saddle, his eyes still sharp as a sniper scope. His wife, Ellen, used to say he'd look the same at 90. Ellen was gone now, 6 years, 2 months, 3 days. He knew the exact count because he counted every morning when he woke up and realized she wasn't there. The pool had become his routine after that, the thing that got him out of bed. He finished the net work and switched to the brush, working the shallow end with precise horizontal strokes. The water rippled beneath his touch, disturbed and then settling. Order and disorder, order and disorder. The way of the world, really, except here at least. Here he could make sure order won. The sun climbed higher. The neighborhood was waking up. He heard Tom Bradshaw's garage door open 2 houses down, heard the Henderson sprinkler system activate with its familiar tick-tick-tick. Normal suburban morning things. Mike didn't care much for neighbors. He'd lived too long in close quarters with thousands of men. Now he wanted silence, privacy, the simple dignity of a man's own backyard. He was draining the skimmer basket when he saw the white envelope on his fence post. It wasn't unusual. His neighbor, Sheila Kowalski, left notes all the time, drawings from her grandkids, recipes she wanted him to try. But this envelope was official-looking, cream-colored, embossed, his name printed in a font that screamed bureaucracy. Mike didn't have a good feeling about it. He dried his hands on his swim trunks and walked over, already knowing what it was. Some part of him had been waiting for it. Neighborhoods like Autumn Ridge Estates didn't let things just be. They had rules. They had committees. They had people who cared deeply about other people's business because their own lives were too small and soft to contain their need for control. He opened it. Official notice of violation. Autumn Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. From the Board of Directors. To Michael James Hargrove, 247 Meadowbrook Lane. Date, March 14, 2024. RE, continued noncompliance with community standards. Dear Mr. Hargrove, it has come to the attention of the board that your residential pool continues to operate in a manner that violates Section 432 of the community bylaws, specifically regarding excessive water use and public nuisance factors. Multiple residents have reported observing unusual water activity, splashing sounds, and what appears to be daily maintenance operations that exceed reasonable standards for a private residential pool. Furthermore, your pool's water clarity and maintained condition suggest chemical treatments incompatible with environmental stewardship guidelines set forth by our community. You are hereby required to cease or significantly modify your pool operations within 14 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply will result in escalation to a formal hearing before the board, potential liens against your property, increased annual HOA fees to cover monitoring costs, possible legal action. We hope to resolve this matter amicably. Respectfully, Victoria Chen, President, Autumn Ridge Estates HOA. On behalf of the Board of Directors. Mike read it 3 times. Then he read it a 4th time, looking for something that might make sense of the words. Unusual water activity. As if he was doing something perverse instead of cleaning his own goddamn pool. He went inside and poured a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, the way he'd drunk it in the Army. The kitchen was spotless, dishes done immediately after use, counters wiped down, trash taken out. Ellen used to laugh at him for it. Mike, the house isn't a barracks, she'd say, and he'd smile because that was true, but also because he genuinely didn't know any other way to live. He sat at the kitchen table, the one Ellen had picked out, the one he'd never changed because changing it felt like admitting she was really gone, and studied the letter again. The language was deliberately vague. Unusual water activity. What did that even mean? He wasn't throwing parties. He wasn't running the jets at night. He cleaned the pool in the morning like a man maintained his property. That was it. That was all. But the threat was clear enough. Liens, increased fees, legal action. These were attacks disguised as policy. These were bureaucratic fists, soft and white-gloved, but fists nonetheless. Mike had fought bureaucratic fists before. Not in the Army. The Army was honest about its violence. He'd fought them in retirement, when the Veterans Affairs Administration had tried to deny Ellen's care benefits because of paperwork errors. He'd won that fight by being patient and precise, and understanding the system better than the system understood itself. He could do this too. He picked up the phone and called the HOA office. Autumn Ridge Estates HOA, this is Jackie speaking. How can I help you? I need to speak with Victoria Chen, Mike said. His voice was calm. He'd learned the value of calm a very long time ago. Mrs. Chen is in a meeting. May I ask what this is regarding? This letter, Mike said. The violation notice. I'd like to understand what exactly I'm being accused of. There was a pause. Then, I can transfer you to her voicemail, or if you prefer, we have a formal process for dispute resolution. You'd need to submit a written response within. I'll speak with her directly, Mike said. Tell her Michael Hargrove will be at the HOA office this afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'm not coming in angry. I'm coming in to understand what the actual violation is. He hung up before she could respond. The Autumn Ridge Estates HOA office was in the community center, a beige brick building that looked like every other community building in America. Inside, it smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. The walls were covered with the kind of cheerful posters that made Mike's teeth itch. Community events, rule reminders, smiling families enjoying their homes. Victoria Chen was waiting for him when he arrived. She was in her late 50s, dressed in business casual, with the kind of careful appearance that suggested she took her position very seriously. Her office was small, neat, and full of filing cabinets. The walls displayed her credentials, board certification in community management, various awards from community associations, framed photos of her and various residents at HOA events. Mr. Hargrove, she said, standing and extending her hand. Thank you for coming in. Mike shook it. Her grip was firm, which surprised him. I came to understand the violation, he said, specifically what excessive water use and public nuisance factors means. Victoria gestured to a chair. Please sit. I understand this was upsetting to receive. It was confusing to receive, Mike said, not upsetting. She sat back down, folding her hands on her desk. We've received complaints from 3 residents about your pool maintenance practices. They report that you're in your pool or actively maintaining it nearly every morning, sometimes for extended periods. The water clarity they observe is unusual for a residential pool, suggesting heavy chemical use. And one resident mentioned hearing unusual sounds, pumps running, water being circulated. Mike felt something cold move through his chest. So the violation is that I keep my pool clean. The violation, Victoria said carefully, is that your pool maintenance operations appear to create a nuisance factor that impacts the community. The water use is excessive. The chemical treatments are questionable, and frankly, the frequency of your activity is. Is what, Mike said, is what exactly? Victoria met his eyes. Is unusual. Most people don't spend that much time and effort on a residential pool. Most people don't maintain them to that standard. It's raising questions. The residents are concerned. I maintain my property to a high standard, Mike said. That's what people do when they own property. Of course, Victoria said. But in a community like ours, there's an understanding that everyone operates within a reasonable range of normalcy. Outliers. Outliers, Mike repeated. Create friction. They make other residents uncomfortable. Why does one pool need to be maintained so intensively? That's the question being asked. Mike stood up. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way he'd learned to stand in the presence of authority. The way that communicated he was leaving because he chose to, not because he was being dismissed. I'll stop using my pool, he said. I'll drain it or cover it or whatever needs to happen so I'm no longer an outlier in the eyes of your community. I'll send you a written confirmation of this within 48 hours. Victoria's face changed. Mr. Hargrove, we don't want you to drain your pool. We want you to use it normally, just not so. Not so what? Mike said. Not so well-maintained, not so obsessively, not so visibly. I understand the message. It came through loud and clear the first time. He walked out of her office, out of the community center, and back to his car. When he got home, Ellen's ghost was waiting for him in the kitchen. She did that sometimes now, appeared in his peripheral vision at the places where she'd been happiest. She'd never complained about his routine. She'd actually loved it, loved that he had something to focus on, something that gave his days structure and purpose. "Well," she said, "what happened?" "They don't like how much I care about it," Mike said out loud, even though he knew she wasn't really there. "They find it disturbing, excessive, abnormal." He looked out the back door at his pool. The water was already starting to get a slight haze to it. In a few days without maintenance, it would turn green. In a week, it would be brown. In 2 weeks, it would be a breeding ground for mosquitoes and algae and all the entropy that a man had to fight against just to keep one small corner of the world in order. He thought about draining it. The decision would be simple. The compliance would be immediate. The conflict would be over. Instead, he walked to his study and opened his computer. He pulled up his files from when he'd fought with the VA, the documentation, the precedents, the legal frameworks. Then he started researching community associations, HOA laws, property rights, discrimination in HOA enforcement. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the same precision they'd moved across the pool brush that morning. Order, pattern, discipline, the tools that had kept him alive through 32 years of military service. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But first, he needed to understand the field. The next morning, Mike woke up and did exactly what he'd always done. He put on his swim trunks, made his coffee, and went to his backyard. The pool needed cleaning. That was simply fact. The water didn't care about Victoria Chen's complaints. Entropy didn't care about community standards. Life required maintenance or it died. He cleaned it perfectly, with all the care and precision of a man who had spent 32 years maintaining the most complicated machinery in the world. Military discipline, soldier morale, and order within chaos. And he waited to see what they would do about it. 3 days later, there was another envelope on his fence post. This one wasn't a single letter. It was a formal notice of a board hearing, scheduled for April 3rd at 7 p.m. at the community center. The hearing would be to determine if Mr. Hargrove's continued noncompliance with the violation notice constituted grounds for escalation to formal legal proceedings and potential lien placement. It also included a list of the specific allegations. Excessive water use, estimated 40+ gallons daily beyond normal residential use. Chemical treatments above residential standards. Noise disturbance, pump operations during early morning hours. Violation of community environmental stewardship standards. Failure to comply with initial violation notice dated March 14, 2024. There was a note at the bottom. You may bring representation to this hearing. Please submit any written response or evidence you wish to present by March 31st. Mike read through it once and then began making phone calls. He called a property rights attorney named David Cross, who advertised on a legal aid website for veterans. David was in his 50s, pragmatic, and spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd dealt with HOA disputes before. "How bad is it?" Mike asked. "Depends," David said. "Do you actually have a pool that uses excessive water?" "I have a pool that I maintain well," Mike said. "I clean it every morning, I run the filters daily, I maintain chemical balance. It's clean, that's the extent of it." "Any parties, any loud music, any actual disturbances?" "No." "Do you know if your water use is actually above the community standard? Have they provided specific measurements?" "No," Mike said. "They just estimate I'm using 40 extra gallons daily." David laughed a brief bark. 40 gallons, that's nothing. A 5-minute shower uses that. An irrigation system uses 10 times that on most residential properties. This is nonsense. "So what do I do?" "You gather evidence," David said. "Documentation of your actual water usage, photos of your pool maintenance. You show that you're not doing anything extraordinary. You prove they're targeting you for compliance with a vague rule that they're not enforcing uniformly. In HOA cases, uniformity of enforcement is everything. If other residents have pools and they're not being cited for excessive use, you have a case. And if they are enforcing it uniformly, then they probably have grounds to enforce it," David said. But I doubt they are. HOAs are usually arbitrary, find the inconsistency, and will work from there. Mike spent the next 2 weeks investigating. He installed a water meter on his pool line and documented his daily usage. Average, 35 gallons a day. He took photographs of his pool maintenance routine, nothing unusual, nothing theatrical, just standard cleaning. He researched community records at the county courthouse and found documentation of every pool in Autumn Ridge Estates that was registered. There were 17. He then drove to each property and observed them. 11 were clearly neglected: green water, visible debris, no signs of regular maintenance. 4 others appeared to be maintained but not obsessively. His was the only one that was kept to a high standard. He looked up the HOA bylaws in detail and found Section 432, which stated, "Residents shall employ reasonable maintenance practices for community amenities. Practices that exceed typical residential standards or create observable nuisance factors shall be subject to review and correction." The language was deliberately vague. Typical residential standards, who determined that? Observable nuisance factors, observable to whom? He researched Victoria Chen and the current HOA board. Victoria had been in her position for 4 years. Before that, she'd worked for 3 other community associations. She had a track record of increasing fines and enforcement actions. The current board consisted of 5 people: Victoria Chen, president; Robert Whitmore, vice president; Sarah Kim, treasurer; Derek Hernandez, secretary; and Walter Mills, member-at-large. Mike found Derek Hernandez's social media. Derek had posted multiple photos of his own meticulously maintained landscaping. His lawn was perfect, his garden immaculate. But no one was complaining about Derek's excessive landscaping practices. He found information about Walter Mills. Walter had a pool too. It was clearly in poor condition, green water visible from the street. No one had sent him a violation notice. The inconsistency was glaring, almost cartoonishly so. Mike compiled everything into a document: 20 pages of evidence, photographs, water usage data, HOA history, and specific examples of uneven enforcement. He submitted it to the HOA office with a cover letter requesting that his case be dismissed due to discriminatory enforcement practices. He sent a copy to David Cross, who called him back immediately. "This is good," David said. "This is really good. They're going to see this and they're going to panic. Either they drop this or they dig in. If they dig in, we've got them. You've built a case." On March 31st, Mike hand-delivered his response to the HOA office. Jackie, the receptionist, took it from him with a look of surprise. He was back home before noon. April 3rd arrived gray and overcast. Mike dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, not business formal but professional. Not aggressive but not submissive either. He drove to the community center at 6:45 p.m., allowing 15 minutes before the hearing started. He wanted to arrive early enough to assess the room, but not early enough to seem desperate or nervous. David Cross met him in the parking lot. David was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray at his temples, and the kind of careful posture that suggested someone who'd learned to take up space without apologizing for it. "How are you feeling?" David asked. "Ready," Mike said. "I don't like uncertainty. I like knowing what I'm dealing with." "That's good," David said, "because this might go either way. If they're smart, they'll drop it. If they're proud or stubborn, they'll escalate and give us ammunition. Either way, we're positioned well." They walked into the community center together. The hearing was being held in the community center's conference room. The space was set up like a low-rent courtroom. A long table at the front where the board sat, facing 2 chairs at a smaller table where complainants sat. There were about 15 residents scattered in the folding chairs behind the complainant table, watching with the kind of fascinated attention that community disputes drew from people whose lives lacked real drama. The 5 board members were arranged behind the long table. Victoria Chen sat in the middle, flanked by Whitmore and Kim. Hernandez and Mills were on the ends. "Mr. Hargrove," Victoria said, scanning a document, Mike's submission. "Thank you for your detailed response. We've reviewed your evidence regarding water usage and your maintenance practices." "Before we proceed," David said, standing, "I'd like to confirm that this hearing is being recorded for the record." "It's being documented," Victoria said. "We have a secretary taking minutes." "I'm going to request that this be audio recorded as well," David said, "for legal purposes." There was a moment of hesitation around the table. Then Walter Mills nodded. "That's reasonable," he said. A tape recorder was produced and placed on the table. Victoria cleared her throat. "This hearing is to determine if Mr. Hargrove's continued operation of his residential pool constitutes a violation of community standards that warrants escalation to formal legal action. Mr. Hargrove has submitted evidence suggesting his water usage is within normal residential parameters. However, we've also received additional complaints since the original notice. We'd like to hear from the concerned residents." A man stood up, Robert Chen, no relation to Victoria, but with the same careful bearing of someone who took himself very seriously. He was in his mid-60s, heavyset, with the ruddy complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. "I live next door to Mr. Hargrove," Robert said. "My daughter visited last month and she was woken up at 6:30 in the morning by the sound of his pool pump. That's noise disturbance. That's harassment." "Your daughter was visiting?" David asked calmly. "Yes, for 3 days." "And the pool pump noise disturbed her once, or multiple times?" "I don't know, once that I know of." "So one instance," David said, "over 3 days." "It was enough," Robert said defensively. "The point is, he's being excessive." Another resident stood, Margaret Hoffman, a woman in her 70s with dyed red hair. "I pass his house on my morning walks," she said. "Every single morning there he is, obsessing over his pool like it's his only reason to live. It's disturbing to see. It suggests something isn't right with him psychologically. That kind of obsessive behavior is a red flag in a community." Mike felt David's hand touch his arm, a reminder to stay calm, to not respond. "So your complaint," David said, "is that Mr. Hargrove's dedication to maintaining his property is psychologically concerning. Not that he's doing anything improper, but that the dedication itself is unusual." "Yes," Margaret said firmly. "In a community, people should do things normally, not to extremes." "Normally," David repeated, "as defined by whom?" "By community standards," Victoria interjected. "Which are the point of an HOA? We maintain standards so that all properties maintain their values and everyone's experience is positive." "I understand," David said, "and I'm trying to understand what standard Mr. Hargrove has violated specifically. His water usage is documented at 35 gallons daily, which is below the usage of many irrigation systems in this community that have not been cited. His maintenance practices appear to be causing no actual harm. His pump operates for approximately 15 minutes in the early morning, which is standard for pool circulation. So I'm trying to understand what the actual violation is, beyond the complaint that his dedication to maintenance is unusual." There was silence around the table. Then Walter Mills spoke. "I've got to be honest," he said. "I've seen Mr. Hargrove's property. It looks better than it did when I moved in 5 years ago. I don't see what the problem is. My daughter has a pool, and she just dumps chemicals in it every other week and doesn't worry about it. Both approaches seem fine to me." "The problem," Victoria said firmly, "is that we have residents who are uncomfortable. In an association community, we have an obligation to address resident concerns." "Do we also have an obligation to address whether those concerns are reasonable?" Walter asked. "Of course," Victoria said, "but reasonableness is subjective." "Not entirely," David said. "There are standards in community law about what constitutes a legitimate nuisance. An occasional noise that causes no actual disruption, property maintenance that is above average, and the personal preference of some residents that a neighbor do things differently. None of those rise to the level of a legitimate community nuisance. If they did, neighborhoods would be in constant conflict." Derek Hernandez had been quiet until now. He adjusted his glasses and spoke carefully. "I've looked at the evidence Mr. Hargrove submitted. The water usage data is clear. The photographs show standard maintenance. I don't think we have grounds to escalate this. I think we should close the complaint." "Seconded," Walter said immediately. Sarah Kim looked uncomfortable. She glanced at Victoria. "I agree with Derek," she said quietly. Robert Whitmore was the last. He looked annoyed. "I think we should vote," he said. "We're voting," Victoria said coldly. "Motion to escalate the complaint to formal legal proceedings." The votes went around the table. Whitmore voted yes. Victoria voted yes. Derek voted no. Walter voted no. Sarah voted no. It was 3-2 against escalation. Victoria's jaw tightened. The motion does not pass. Mr. Hargrove's case is being dismissed. She paused. However, the HOA will continue to monitor the situation. If circumstances change, we reserve the right to reopen this complaint. That sounds like harassment, David said mildly. Continuing to monitor one resident who has been cleared of violation charges seems like selective enforcement. It's not harassment, Victoria said. It's due diligence. I'd recommend that you document that you're monitoring all pool owners equally, David said, just to maintain consistency. The implication hung in the air. If you're specifically targeting my client, we'll have grounds to sue. Victoria's face went pale. This meeting is adjourned. Mike and David walked back to their cars in silence. When they got to the parking lot, David extended his hand. You won, David said, for now. For now, Mike said. Victoria Chen is not someone who accepts defeat easily. That move where she said they'd continue monitoring, that's not over. She's going to keep trying. She's not going to let this go. Let her try, Mike said. I have documentation of everything. I have consistency on my side. I have the law on my side. You have the law when it's interpreted correctly, David said. But laws are interpreted by people. People have egos. People have agendas. Be careful, Mike. This isn't over. But for 3 weeks it seemed like it was. No more letters. No more complaints. Mike went back to his morning routine. The pool, the brush, the perfect water. Ellen's ghost sat in the patio chair most mornings and nodded approvingly. Then, in late April, the doorbell rang. Mike opened the door to find Victoria Chen standing on his porch, and behind her, a man in a suit with a clipboard. Good morning, Victoria said. This is Daniel Ashford from the County Building Department. We're here to conduct a compliance inspection of your pool to ensure that your current setup meets all local building codes. It's a routine inspection. Mike's heart did something strange in his chest. A routine inspection, except nothing about this was routine. Of course, Mike said, come in. Part 3, the inspection. Daniel Ashford was a thin man in his early 60s with the demeanor of someone who'd spent his entire career enforcing rules that only he truly understood. He carried a clipboard, a flashlight, and a measuring tape. Behind him, Victoria Chen wore the expression of someone playing a game she was confident she would win. They walked through Mike's house to the backyard. Ashford immediately began photographing the pool from multiple angles: the pump, the filter system, the deck, the water level. How long has this pool been in operation? Ashford asked. Since 1998, Mike said, 26 years. And the system was installed by me, Mike said. I did the installation work. Ashford made a note. Do you have the original permits and inspection documents from the installation? They're somewhere, Mike said. The work was done decades ago. The county would have records. We'll need to verify that, Ashford said. If there's no record of proper installation and inspection, this system may be in violation of current building codes. It's been operating safely for 26 years, Mike said. That doesn't matter, Victoria interjected. Building codes evolve. What was acceptable in 1998 may not be acceptable now. Ashford ignored her and continued his inspection, measuring the distance of the pool from the property line, checking the deck's structural integrity, examining the filter system setup. He tested the water, frowned, made notes. Chemical balance is good, he said. Copper content is normal. Chlorine levels are well within standard range. He pulled a laminated code book from his truck and spent 40 minutes cross-referencing various regulations, photographing specific elements of the pool, and making detailed notes. Finally, he closed his clipboard. I'm going to need to research your installation records, he said. I'll need you to come into the office and provide documentation or permission for us to access the county archives. If we can't establish that this pool was properly permitted and inspected according to the codes in effect at the time of installation, there may be citations involved. What kind of citations? Mike asked. Potentially significant ones, Ashford said. If we determine the system is a hazard, we can require remediation or even removal, but that's a worst-case scenario. Let's see what the records show first. He handed Mike a business card. Call my office Monday morning. We'll set up an appointment. Then he packed up his equipment and left, leaving Victoria to linger a moment longer. I'll see you soon, Mr. Hargrove, Victoria said with a small smile. I hope this resolves smoothly. Mike called David Cross immediately after they left. They're going to find that my pool wasn't properly permitted, Mike said without preamble. I did the work myself in 1998. I didn't pull permits. It worked fine, but I didn't follow the official channels. How common is that? David asked. Very common, Mike said. Homeowners do their own work all the time. Did the county ever complain? Did you have any issues when you sold the property? Any inspection problems? No, Mike said. None of that. The pool worked fine. Then the fact that it wasn't technically permitted in the 1990s shouldn't be grounds for removal now, David said. I'll research the statutes, but I'm pretty sure there's a clause about retroactive enforcement. Once a system has been in place for a certain period, and 26 years is well past it, you can't suddenly enforce old code requirements. It's unjust. But I'll verify. They're trying to find a way to force me to drain it, Mike said flatly. Yes, David agreed. That appears to be their objective. The HOA can't force you directly, but the county can through building code violations. So they got the county involved. It's clever, actually. And it's potentially illegal, but we need to prove collusion. What do you need? I need to know if they complained to the building department before the hearing or after, David said. I need to know if there's documentation showing they initiated this inspection. I need to establish a pattern of escalating harassment. Right now it's 2 complaints followed by an inspection. That could just be routine due diligence. But if we can show they went to the county specifically because they were losing the HOA complaint, that's different. That's abuse of process. Mike spent the next 4 days researching. He filed public records requests for all HOA correspondence with the county building department dating back 6 months. He requested documentation of all complaints filed with the building department about his property. He requested meeting minutes from the HOA board for the past quarter. What came back in the mail was revealing. The building department received an anonymous complaint on April 5th, 3 days after the HOA hearing where they'd been voted down. The complaint stated that a residential pool at 247 Meadowbrook Lane may not have proper permits and appears to have unauthorized modifications. On April 8th, Victoria Chen called the building department herself. According to the documentation, she stated that a concerned resident had raised questions about the pool's safety and that she, as HOA president, was obligated to have it inspected for community welfare purposes. On April 10th, the inspection was scheduled. It was textbook retaliation. The HOA lost the hearing, couldn't force compliance, and immediately escalated to a government agency. Mike compiled this documentation and sent it to David with a note. They're trying to destroy me because I beat them in a hearing. The meeting with the county building department was scheduled for Tuesday, April 16th at 10 a.m. Mike arrived with David in tow, which seemed to surprise Ashford, who clearly wasn't expecting legal representation over a pool permit issue. This seems like overkill, Ashford said, eyeing David. My client has concerns about the motivation behind this inspection, David said calmly. He'd like to ensure that the process is objective. Of course it's objective, Ashford said. We inspect all pools. Do you? David asked. Do you have a routine inspection schedule for all residential pools in the county? Not exactly, Ashford admitted. We respond to complaints. And how many complaints about residential pools do you receive monthly? I don't have that data off the top of my head. But you could get it, couldn't you? David said. You could tell us how many pool inspections you've conducted this quarter, how many citations have been issued for improper permits. Why? Ashford asked. Because my client would like to understand if this inspection is routine or if he's being targeted, David said. And because the inspection was initiated by the HOA specifically for the purpose of circumventing an HOA hearing that they lost. That's an abuse of process. Ashford looked uncomfortable. The HOA president's concern about community safety is legitimate. Is it? David said. Or was it retaliation for losing a complaint hearing? You have documentation here that shows the HOA lost a hearing on April 3rd. On April 5th, an anonymous complaint appears. On April 8th, the HOA president follows up. That's not routine due diligence. That's coordinated harassment using a government agency. I can't speak to the HOA's motivations, Ashford said. I can only speak to whether there's a code violation. Is there, David asked directly, is the pool currently a safety hazard? Not that I've observed, Ashford said. The system appears to be functioning properly. The water chemistry is excellent. The deck is safe. So there is no actual hazard. Not currently, but without proper permits and inspection records. 26 years of safe operation, David said. That's the permit. That's the inspection. After 26 years, retroactive enforcement is unreasonable, and I suspect it's also illegal under county statutes regarding grandfather clause provisions. Mike saw Ashford's jaw tighten. The man knew he was right. I'm going to research the grandfather clause issue, Ashford said finally. I'll get back to you within 2 weeks, but I want to be clear. If we determine this system is in violation, it will need to be remediated. And if you determine it's grandfathered, David said, what happens then? Then we'll close the inspection, Ashford said. No citation, no requirement for remediation. Good, David said. My client looks forward to your findings. I assume you'll send them in writing. Of course. They left the building department office with a tentative victory. Not certain, not final, but something. They're going to research the grandfather clause, David said as they walked to their cars. And they're going to find that I'm right. You can't suddenly enforce old codes retroactively on systems that have been operating safely for decades. It would create chaos. Every old pool, every old roof, every old electrical system in the county would be vulnerable. No one would support that. So it's over, Mike asked. This particular avenue is over, David said. But Victoria Chen isn't going to stop. She's going to find another angle. This is personal for her now. She got embarrassed in front of her board and she got outmaneuvered by you and me. She's not going to let that stand. 2 weeks later, on April 30th, the building department issued its finding. The pool was grandfathered under County Code Section 732, which protected structures that had been safely operating for more than 10 years. No citation, no remediation required, no violation. Mike framed the letter and hung it in his study next to the commendations from the Army. But that night he lay in bed and thought about what David had said. Victoria Chen wasn't going to stop. She'd already lost the HOA hearing. She'd already lost the building department inspection. She was running out of official channels, but there were always unofficial channels. There was always the possibility of escalation into something uglier. He thought about Ellen, about how she'd died in a hospital bed, how the VA had initially denied her benefits, how he'd had to fight every step of the way to get her the care she needed. How exhausting it was to fight. How defeating it was to realize you had to fight for things that should have been simple. How much a person could take before they broke. The next morning, Mike went to his pool at 6:47 a.m., same as always. The water was perfect. He cleaned it methodically, brush stroke after brush stroke, maintaining order, maintaining discipline, maintaining the one thing in his life that he could control. He didn't know that Victoria Chen was already planning her next move. He didn't know that she'd spent 3 weeks researching different angles, different approaches, different ways to make his life difficult that didn't involve the county building department or the HOA board. He didn't know that she'd found something in his property records that had nothing to do with his pool. The 3rd week of May arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made people believe the world was fundamentally good. The trees in Mike's neighborhood had leafed out to full green, the flowers were blooming, and the community had settled into the quiet rhythm of early summer. It was on a Tuesday morning that Victoria Chen walked through the county courthouse records room with Derek Hernandez's wife, Catherine, a retired paralegal who had connections to people in county government and a general interest in how things worked. What they were looking for was property history. Not just any property history. They were looking for inconsistencies, problems, potential violations in how Mike Hargrove had developed his land over the past quarter century. Catherine had suggested the angle. If the pool doesn't work, she'd said to Victoria over coffee, maybe there's something else. Does he have unpermitted structures? Has he modified his property in ways that need zoning clearance? Does he have property line issues? It was the kind of detail-oriented thinking that Victoria respected. It was also the kind of thinking that crossed a line, though Victoria wasn't entirely aware she was crossing it at the time. She was operating on momentum now, on anger, on the fundamental human belief that if she was right about someone being wrong, she was justified in using any means to prove it. What they found in the property records room was not what they were looking for. What they found was a notice of lien from 1996. A tax lien against Mike's property for $47,000 in unpaid federal income taxes. The lien had been filed on March 14, 1996, and according to the records, it was never satisfied. There was no release of lien. There was no notation that it had been paid or dismissed. It simply existed, dormant and official, on Mike's property record. Catherine made copies. Victoria photographed them with her phone. And then Victoria did what she had been trained to do for decades as an HOA president. She escalated. She called the IRS directly. The phone call was cordial and professional. Victoria identified herself as the HOA president for the community where Michael Hargrove resided. She explained that they were conducting standard due diligence on all community members and had discovered what appeared to be an unresolved federal tax lien on his property. She was calling to verify if this was an active or resolved matter, as it impacted the community's records and potentially the property's marketability. The IRS agent she spoke to, a man named Harold something, tired sounding, explained that he couldn't discuss individual tax matters without the property owner's permission. But he confirmed that, yes, according to their records, there was an unresolved lien from 1996. Victoria thanked him and hung up. What she had was a potential nuclear bomb. A federal tax lien, not satisfies, potentially still active. And if it was active, it was a legal claim against the property that superseded the HOA. It meant the federal government had first claim on the property's value. It meant Mike might not actually own his home free and clear. It meant there were far larger problems than a clean pool. Victoria did something then that crossed from being a zealous HOA president into something darker. She took the documentation to a reporter. Her contact was a man named Paul Davenport who wrote for the local online news site, Pro-Publian Gazette, which covered neighborhood stories and community issues. Paul was in his mid-50s, interested in investigative pieces, and always eager for a story about community conflict or potential fraud. "I'm concerned about a property in our community," Victoria told him over coffee. "I've discovered some legal issues that might affect other homeowners. I want to make sure we're not dealing with a situation where someone's property problems could affect everyone else." "What kind of issues?" Paul asked, recording the conversation on his phone. "Tax liens," Victoria said. "Federal liens that haven't been resolved. It's a public record, so I'm not violating anyone's privacy. But it raises questions about the property owner's legitimacy and whether the community is safe financially." "Can you show me the documentation?" Paul asked. Victoria spread the photocopies across the table. Paul photographed them with his phone. "This is interesting," he said. "How long has this person been in your community?" "About 15 years, Victoria said. "But the lien is from 1996, so it predates his residence here. What concerns me is that he appears to be a person of means. He's maintained his property very well, so why hasn't he resolved a federal tax lien? That suggests either criminal intent or something else that we should be aware of." What she didn't mention was that she'd lost the HOA hearing with Mike. What she didn't mention was that this was retaliation dressed up as community protection. Paul Davenport called Mike's house on a Thursday morning. "Mr. Hargrove, this is Paul Davenport from Pro-Publian Gazette. I'm writing a story about federal tax compliance in residential communities, and I've come across something in the public records related to your property. I'd like to give you a chance to comment before the story publishes." Mike felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What did you find?" he asked. "A federal tax lien filed in 1996, Paul said. "It appears to be unresolved. I'm trying to understand the circumstances around it." Mike closed his eyes. He thought about what had happened in 1996. He thought about Ellen. He thought about medical debt that wasn't technically medical debt because the hospital charges had gotten tangled with federal tax issues related to how his disability income from a service-related injury was classified and reclassified and taxed again by different federal agencies that didn't communicate with each other. "It was a clerical error," Mike said slowly. "It was resolved 30 years ago. The IRS should have a release of lien on file." "I checked," Paul said. "I didn't see a release." "Then check again," Mike said, "or give me time to provide documentation." "How much time?" Paul asked. "I'll call you back tomorrow," Mike said and hung up. He immediately called David Cross. "A tax lien from 1996, David said, his voice strained. "Mike, that's a serious issue if it's still active." "It's not active," Mike said. "It was resolved, I paid the taxes, I got a release." "Do you have the release documentation?" "It should be in my files somewhere. Ellen handled a lot of the paperwork during that period." "You need to find it," David said urgently. "Because if you can't produce it, a federal tax lien from 1996 that's still on the public record is a real problem, more serious than the HOA issue, more serious than the building permit issue. This is federal, Mike. This is IRS. "I'll find it," Mike said. "I'll call you back." Mike spent the next 6 hours going through every file, every drawer, every box in his study. He had been disciplined about record-keeping his entire adult life. Receipts, statements, tax returns, bills, bank records, everything organized, everything filed, everything a soldier would maintain. But the period from 1994 to 1998 was confused. Ellen had been sick during that time, not seriously, but frequently with various complications that required treatment. There had been medical debt. There had been miscommunication between the VA, his disability income, and the IRS about how his compensated disability was taxed. There had been an initial assessment of additional taxes owed that he disputed. He'd filed an appeal. He'd provided documentation. And somewhere in that process, the lien had been removed from his record by the IRS. But apparently, it hadn't been removed from the public property records. He found a box labeled Ellen's Medical 1996-1998 and opened it. Carefully organized, meticulously filed, that was Ellen. She had been a librarian before retirement. Organization was her religion. He found correspondence with the IRS dated March 18, 1997, an appeal hearing decision. The federal lien was being released due to successful appeal of the assessment. The letter was official, bearing the IRS seal. But he needed to find proof that it had actually been released from the public record, not just from IRS records. He called the county recording office. It took 3 hours and 3 phone calls, but finally a clerk at the county records office confirmed. There had been a release of lien filed in June of 1997. It should have updated the property record. But sometimes these things didn't synchronize properly with old paper records that were being digitized. She would send him a copy of the release document. Mike called Paul Davenport back at 8 p.m. "The lien was resolved in 1997, Mike said. "I have documentation. I can provide it to you." "Can you bring it by tomorrow?" Paul asked. "I can email it," Mike said. "I can fax it. I'd rather not leave originals." "Email is fine," Paul said. "Send everything you have." Mike scanned the documents, the appeal hearing decision, the release of lien, the county records confirmation, and emailed them to Paul. Then he sat in the dark of his study and tried to figure out how a reporter knew about a 30-year-old tax lien that had been resolved before most people in the neighborhood were even born. He called David again. "Victoria Chen," David said immediately. "It has to be. She found the lien in the public records and contacted the reporter. She's trying to destroy your credibility now that she can't win on the HOA front. This is harassment that's escalating into something more serious." "Can you sue her for this?" Mike asked. "For finding public records and giving them to a reporter. That's murky legally," David said. "But if we can prove that she's specifically targeting you, that she's using public resources and the media as weapons in an escalating vendetta, we might have grounds for harassment or even abuse of process. I'll need to think about it, but yes, I think we might have a case." Paul Davenport called back at 9 a.m. the next morning. "I reviewed the documentation you sent," Paul said. "The appeal decision is clear. The lien was released in 1997. The county records should have been updated. My initial lead was incomplete. I'm not running the story." Mike felt relief. Then he realized the actual problem. "Who gave you the lien information?" he asked. "I can't reveal my source," Paul said, "but I will tell you that they presented it as community concern about financial liability." "The HOA," Mike said. "I can't confirm that," Paul said, "but I can tell you that this looks like a personal vendetta that's been dressed up as a community concern. I don't do stories like that. I do stories about facts, not stories about people using facts as weapons against neighbors. I hope this is resolved for you." He hung up. That afternoon, Mike received an email from Victoria Chen. It was copied to the entire HOA board. Subject: Community Maintenance Standards and Financial Responsibility. Dear Mr. Hargrove, recent investigations by the HOA have uncovered some historical financial issues related to your property. While these issues appear to have been resolved, they raise questions about the kind of community management and oversight that's necessary to protect all residents' property values and financial interests. This is not to suggest any ongoing impropriety on your part. However, the HOA board has decided that, in light of these concerns, we will be implementing enhanced financial auditing procedures for all residents as part of our ongoing community stewardship. Additionally, the board has noted that your continued insistence on maintaining your pool to standards that exceed community norms, combined with these financial history issues, suggests a need for formal probationary status. For the next 12 months, your property will be under formal HOA monitoring, with monthly inspections to ensure ongoing community compliance. We will be in touch with specific details regarding the inspection schedule. Respectfully, Victoria Chen. This is it, David said immediately. This is the smoking gun. This is her admitting in writing that she's escalating enforcement against you specifically. She's explicitly connecting the resolved tax lien issue to the pool monitoring as if they're both reasons for probationary status. She's formalizing harassment. What do we do? Mike asked. We file a lawsuit, David said. Abuse of process, harassment, discrimination. We name Victoria Chen personally and the HOA as defendants. We argue that they're using government agencies and the media as tools for personal vendetta. We argue that the financial inspection scheme is pretextual, a way to justify ongoing harassment after the pool complaint failed. We're going to hit them hard, Mike, and we're going to win. I don't want to litigate for months, Mike said. We're already litigating, David said. We're litigating in the hearing. We're litigating with the building department. You're already in this, Mike. The question is whether we fight back now or keep reacting to their moves. Mike thought about Ellen. He thought about the VA benefits fight. He thought about all the energy it had taken to maintain discipline and fairness in the face of people who weren't playing fair. Draft the lawsuit, Mike said finally. But give them one chance first. Send them a letter, tell them to stop. The cease and desist letter arrived at the HOA office on May 28th, bearing the letterhead of Cross and Associates, attorney at law. It was addressed to Victoria Chen personally and copied to each board member individually. The letter was detailed, precise, and devastating. It outlined the sequence of events: the initial HOA complaint, the loss of the hearing, the sudden building department inspection within days of that loss, the discovery and exploitation of a 30-year-old resolved tax lien, the contact with a media outlet, and finally the escalation to formal probationary monitoring that explicitly connected unrelated historical matters to current enforcement. The letter argued that this constituted abuse of process, using HOA procedures and government agencies as personal weapons rather than legitimate community tools. Harassment, a pattern of escalating retaliation specifically targeting one individual after losing a formal proceeding. Discrimination, enforcing community standards selectively against Mr. Hargrove while ignoring identical violations by other residents. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, deliberate conduct intended to harm Mr. Hargrove's reputation and well-being. The letter concluded, Mr. Hargrove is prepared to pursue all available legal remedies, including but not limited to litigation against the HOA, Victoria Chen individually, and any other parties involved in this coordinated harassment campaign. However, he is willing to consider a resolution that includes 1. Immediate cessation of all enforcement actions against Mr. Hargrove's property. 2. Withdrawal of the probationary monitoring notice. 3. A written apology from the HOA and Victoria Chen. 4. Attorney's fees in the amount of $15,000. And 5. A signed agreement that no further enforcement actions will be taken against Mr. Hargrove's pool or property without board consensus vote rather than presidential discretion. The letter gave them 10 business days to respond. The HOA office imploded. Derek Hernandez was the first to call David Cross. This is insane, he said. Victoria is insane. We never agreed to this probationary monitoring thing. She just sent that email on her own. Can you verify that in writing? David asked. Yes, I can send you the board email chain. She didn't ask our permission. She didn't even tell us she was planning it. That helps, David said. It shows the action was unilateral. Walter Mills called next. I'm voting to remove her as president, he said. This has gone too far. She's made the entire board vulnerable to a lawsuit. Sarah Kim called next, then Robert Whitmore, each offering different versions of confusion and concern about Victoria's actions. Whitmore, who had supported the escalation at the hearing, was the most defensive, but even he seemed to recognize that Victoria had crossed a line. Victoria Chen herself didn't call David. Instead, she called the HOA's insurance company and reported a potential claim. 1 week later, the HOA received a letter from their insurance company's legal defense team. The insurance would cover defense of the HOA in the lawsuit, but not Victoria Chen personally. Her actions appeared to be outside the scope of her employment in that she was operating without board authorization and using HOA resources for personal purposes. The insurance company would defend the HOA, but Victoria would need separate counsel, and she would be personally liable for any damages awarded for her own conduct.